You ever look at your grocery bill and wonder, man, why is everything so expensive all of a sudden? Well, what if I told you that a big part of the answer lies in a conflict happening thousands of miles away, in a tiny strip of water you might not have even heard of? Today, we're going to trace that invisible line all the way from a global flashpoint right to your kitchen table. So, it all comes down to this one spot, the Strait of Hormuz. And as the Observer Research Foundation puts it, this place is a major fulcrum for geopolitical risk. When things get tense here, the entire global economy kind of holds its breaths. But what is it about this specific place that gives it so much power?
Well, it's just basic geography. At its skinniest point, the strait is only 21 miles wide, and the shipping lanes, the actual paths the giant tankers have to take, they're just 2 miles across in each direction. I mean, just picture that. A massive chunk of the world's most essential stuff is being squeezed through a bottleneck that's narrower than the Boston Marathon.
So yeah, that brings us to the big question. If we think of this strait as a critical artery for the global economy, what happens when it gets clogged? The answer, as we're about to see, has a direct, and I mean direct, impact on our food. Now, when you hear about trouble in this part of the world, your first thought is probably oil, right? And gas prices. And yeah, that's a huge part of it. But there's a hidden story here, a secret dependency that's even more fundamental to how we feed billions of people.
So yeah, everyone's talking about the oil crisis, but the crisis we're not talking enough about is fertilizer. It might not sound as dramatic, but trust me, it's just as vital for keeping our world running.
And to get why, we need a super quick science lesson. It's called the Haber-Bosch process. This is basically the magic trick that lets us create modern fertilizers. The key ingredient, the fuel for this whole process, is natural gas. And guess where a huge amount of the world's natural gas comes from? You got it, the Gulf region.
This really breaks it down perfectly. You start with natural gas from the Gulf. That gas is used to create ammonia, and that ammonia is the building block for nitrogen fertilizers like urea. It's a simple chain. No gas from the Gulf, no ammonia. No ammonia, no fertilizer for farmers all over the world. End of story. And the scale of our reliance on this one spot is just staggering. About a third, 1 out of every 3 tons, of all fertilizer that's shipped by sea has to pass through this single choke point. We've basically placed a huge bet on one of the most volatile regions in the world to keep our food supply going.
Okay, so let's connect the dots. How does a fight in a far-off shipping lane actually make the food in your local supermarket more expensive? Let's follow the money.
The very first domino to fall is right here, in the commodity markets. The price of urea, which is kind of the gold standard for nitrogen fertilizer, has already shot up by about 30% in just 1 month. That is a massive, immediate cost increase for the most basic ingredient in modern farming.
And listen, this isn't just some number on a trader's screen. Farming leaders are seriously sounding the alarm. They're calling this a production shock and framing it as a threat to national security. Because it's true, if farmers can't get fertilizer or can't afford it, harvests shrink. That's a food security crisis waiting to happen. And some countries are way more exposed than others. You take an agricultural giant like Brazil, they import over 90% of their urea. They're incredibly vulnerable. India, another huge importer, is in a really tough spot. And then you have countries like Pakistan and Bangladesh. They actually rely on gas from Qatar shipped through the strait to make their own fertilizer. So for them, it's a double whammy. So for farmers, the math is simple, and it's brutal.
They're hit with this huge spike in costs right when they need to be planting. And that cost has to go somewhere. It gets passed down the line from the farm to the shipper to the grocery store and finally right to you at the checkout counter. This is literally how a geopolitical crisis in the Gulf becomes a kitchen table problem for families everywhere. All right, let's zoom out for a second. Why are we so fragile? How did we build a global food system that can be so easily threatened by a single point of failure? Well, this whole crisis is really shining a bright light on a major flaw in how we think about what's important. I mean, this table says it all. For decades, the world's biggest economies have been smartly stockpiling oil in strategic reserves. They've even built pipelines to get around these choke points. But when you look at the column for fertilizer, it's empty. No strategic reserves, no backup plans. We have a plan B for our cars, but we have no plan B for our food. And here's the cold, hard reason why. A tanker full of oil is just worth a lot more money than a tanker full of fertilizer. So when the seas get rough, all the resources, the naval escorts, the insurance coverage, the political muscle, it all goes to protecting the oil. And the food supply chain, it's just left exposed.
Okay, so we see the problem. That's step one. Now the real question is, what on earth can we do about it? How do we build a system that's, a little tougher?
Well, the experts have a few ideas. First, we have to stop putting all our eggs in one basket. We need to invest in different trade routes, so we're not so reliant on one choke point. Second, we need countries to work together better to keep these vital ceilings safe for all essential goods, not just oil. And maybe most importantly, we have to completely rethink the fertilizer supply chain itself to make it less fragile and less centralized.
And we need to act fast, because here's the thing. Even if the conflict magically ended tomorrow, it takes weeks to get the factories back up and running, to get the ships moving again. For farmers in the Northern Hemisphere who need to plant their crops right now, those are weeks they just don't have. This could affect the next harvest, big time. Which leaves us with this final, really important question. What's happening in the Strait of Hormuz is more than just a news headline. It's a massive stress test for the entire global system, and it's showing some serious cracks. It forces us to ask, is the very system that feeds all of us just too fragile for the world we live in today?